Good morning. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the Wilson Center, and to welcome back to the Wilson Center a very old friend and colleague from that seems to forecast. Serving as Director of African Affairs at the National Security Council and Special Advisor at the Department of State. He's worked for members of Congress, the United Nations, as well as numerous humanitarian aid agencies, rights organizations, think tanks. He's helped create the Raise Hope for Congo campaign aimed at ending violence against women and girls in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He's currently helping to produce a series of videos highlighting the issue of Congo's conflict over minerals. He's written extensively on Africa and both its politics and its humanitarian struggles. He travels regularly to the Africa's war zones, fact-finding missions on peacemaking initiatives and awareness-raising trips. So it's delightful to have you back here at the Wilson Center. He'll speak to us for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I should indicate in advance that my oral surgeon just called and rescheduled an appointment I had. So I have to leave here about 11:45 in order to make my doctor's appointment this morning. I apologize for that in advance.
Well, we'll provide some of the anesthesia for you.
I'll harass you before I leave, however. And then Steve McDonald will take over and moderate the conclusion of the program.
Thank you, Howard. Things are also, of course, very critical, not only on the ground in Congo, but here in Washington as the sort of policy reviews unfold and the rumors swirl about the appointment of a special envoy for the Great Lakes region. So I figured, just in case, to hedge my bets, might be good to come and drop by the Woodrow Wilson Center for what might be one of the last of this really extraordinary speaker series that you and Steve together have overseen over the course of the last. But then again, maybe it won't. Maybe we'll go on into the fall, into the winter.
No matter what.
But I want to begin today with the central hypothesis of what we've been trying to do at the Enough Project. So to begin a little bit with advocacy, then go into research and analysis, and then end with advocacy. And our central contention is that the world's deadliest war, as we all know, and the highest rates of recorded violence against women and girls in the world taking place in the Congo today will only have a chance of ending if we can successfully mount a consumer campaign led by American and European, Asian cell phone and laptop and iPod consumers to begin to demand from Western companies that we will only buy conflict-free electronics products from these companies. This imperative, I think, has become more urgent than ever based on the field work that I just finished over the last month as a new offensive, as many of you read this morning in Stephanie's excellent piece in the Washington Post, new offensive by the Congolese government backed by MONUC, the UN Observer Mission, has unintentionally but predictably led to a major spike in human rights violations in Congo, in particular violence against women and girls. We've seen the epidemic of rape spike again, the abduction of children as soldiers and as sex slaves, the burning of houses or even entire villages, as was cataloged this morning, and the systematic looting of civilians. The humanitarian crisis has deepened dramatically in pockets with hundreds of thousands, some estimate up to 500,000 newly displaced since the beginning of 2009 as a result of these various operations. as a result of counterattacks by the FDLR and further operations by the LRA in the Northeast. Attention must be paid to these horrible atrocities. Major changes in policy must be made urgently. The conventional assessment of the conflict in the Congo usually produces, understandably, a laundry list of things that must be done inside Congo and in the surrounding region in order to give peace a chance. I'll give you my version of that at some point in terms of what the things we need to introduce a real comprehensive policy. But the trees of today's urgent conflict management imperatives should not obscure the forest. That ultimately the fuel for the world's deadliest conflict is provided by American, European, and Asian demand for electronic products and jewelry that source some of their raw materials in Congo. The minerals didn't cause the war in the Congo, but they are now the main rationale for its continuation, and they sustain the armed combatants, just as with the blood diamonds of Sierra Leone and Angola. Until there was a change in the way the world purchased diamonds, there would be no chance for peace in those countries. Similarly, we believe there will be no chance for peace in Congo until the world figures out a way to purchase that country's minerals without fueling horrific violence. Let's go to the immediate challenge, which is this government MONUC offensive against the FDLR on the back of the Rwandan intervention earlier this year in the context of its agreement with the Congolese government. On the surface now, there has been a sea change in Congolese and regional politics as a result of the unprecedented deal struck between the Rwandan and Congolese governments, which led to the arrest of CNDP chief Nkunda and a time-bound Rwandan army incursion into North Kivu to displace the FDLR from a number of its mining concessions. The military impact of Rwanda's short incursion earlier this year was limited. It displaced certainly the FDLR from some of its mines that it had controlled in North Kivu, but leaving the FDLR's chain of command intact and its international network of support intact as well. But the political impact was and potentially will be far greater, providing a unique opportunity to improve one of these bilateral relationships between Congo and Rwanda that has been central to the cycle of conflict in the Congo for at least 15 years. A March 23rd, 2009 deal that most of you know about allowed the Rwandan-backed CNDP and other militias to join the Congolese army in the context of the new relationship between leading officials in Kinshasa and in Kigali. Thousands of troops of the CNDP and other smaller militias have been integrated, in quotes, into the Congolese government army in a hurried and an unstructured way that has in some places created even more instability than had existed previously. All the efforts that have been ongoing for decades now in Congolese army reform have been complicated and compromised by the disorganized nature of this integration, as internal divisions and severe indiscipline within the army intensify. And as of today, the rapid integration is breaking apart in some areas due to lack of payments and inadequate follow-up to address the related organizational issues of adding these new armies into the mix. Whole units are deserting as a result in some locations, while looting, indiscipline, and less military pressure on the FDLR are the short-term outcomes. If salaries are not paid on a regular basis, then the integration of the militias as well as the military operations against the FDLR will certainly fail, which wouldn't necessarily be a major thing, except they're going to fail spectacularly with deadly consequences for Congolese civilian populations. Now, numerous war criminals have been integrated in the government army command structure, which itself already has numerous commanders with horrific human rights record. You all know Bosco Ntaganda, the new leader of the CNDP and an indicted ICC war criminal. He's just the tree that hides the forest of major human rights abusers who are now in command positions in the FARDC. No vetting whatsoever. I mean, we've been talking about this thing for 15 years. No vetting whatsoever has occurred in the process of integration. And how can you stop impunity, which is one of the drivers of conflict in Central Africa? How can you stop impunity when you have these kinds of people in command positions and top Congolese officials, in fact, defending that they're in command positions, as we saw again this morning in Stephanie's excellent article. The chain of events has informally, now this is important and not something you'll read everywhere, the chain of events has informally allowed the CNDP and Rwanda to expand their roles in mineral smuggling in the Kivus, an area which many of you know is the size of California with almost no roads. The Rwandan-backed CNDP is now part of the Congolese government army. Many of the CNDP units have indeed remained intact, and there are still, there are CNDP units now, but they're wearing government army uniforms. So some lightly integrated CNDP units into the FARDC in North and South Kivu have been sent to the front lines and are focusing on either pushing the FDLR out of some of its mineral producing areas or keeping them out of the areas that the Rwandans pushed them out of in North Kivu earlier this year. With parallel chains of command within the CNDP, observers on the ground say that these elements are doing much of the fighting, if any, against the FDLR. As a result, these CNDP units and their commercial allies across the border share in the mining and the taxation and the smuggling opportunities that the shift in control from FDLR to these new units produces. So let's talk a bit about this inaptly named Kimia 2. The military operation currently, which this government army offensive, backed with as much logistical support that MONUC can muster, is focusing its military operations primarily on the FDLR mining areas in South Kivu and primarily against the mines in order to reduce the FDLR's financial lifeline. That's a logical premise. However, and this is that's the size of this building, the Congolese army is structurally incapable of sustaining coherent military operations against the FDLR. In many places, government army units historically have been close allies of the FDLR. If you didn't know that, you're not watching Congo. They've been sharing mines and taxation and smuggling opportunities almost as soon as these Interahamwe and ex-FAR came over the border in 1994. The FDLR received the bulk of their ammunition from the Congolese government's army and the relationships. Now these relationships, these ties die hard even with the new constellation, an alliance between Congo and Rwanda. And in some places, these relationships have not died at all. So FDLR units are allegedly being tipped off in advance of government army movements in some locations, allowing them to melt into the forest and wait for more propitious conditions to return to their mines. So as Kimia 2, as this offensive heats up, there are widespread reports, as all of you probably have seen in the OCHA reports and other things, of government army abuses against the civilian population, particularly sexual assaults, child abductions, and looting. The predatory activities of this government army and the newly integrated units will undermine any military operations, as I've just said. It'll strain the coalition building effort between formerly warring parties, and it will further terrorize the civilian population. Equally, as the military operation unfolds, the FDLR's campaign of reprisal attacks against civilians that Annika talked about in her quote this morning is intensifying as well, using its usual strategy of asymmetrical warfare. It's very similar, by the way, to the LRA. The FDLR focuses its military campaign largely on civilian populations in retribution for its former allies, the Congolese government and a number of Mai units like Pareko, turning on the FDLR and allying with the Rwandan government and its CND proxies in these last 6 months. So the FDLR in retribution is burning and raping, even leaving notes warning people that they will burn them if they come back to their villages. The FDLR is receiving further support from its diaspora political leadership, which was able to set up a new weapons supplier from Tanzania recently, according to some of the UN people that are monitoring this. This is giving the FDLR more capacity and boosting their morale in the face of this government MONUC offensive. And some of the forces even that had integrated into the government army after the March 23 deal are defecting and reaffiliating with the FDLR, including some Mai groups. So a central question must be asked, especially of international support for Kimia 2. Does the Endgame, which is again, I think a very important objective, removal of the FDLR. Does the endgame justify the means? With so many displaced, so many raped, so many looted, and killed directly and indirectly, resulting from a poorly planned, premature, and limited military-only strategy? Of course, the answer is no. It is not justified. And predictably, there is widespread opposition to these operations from Congolese civilian populations on the ground in North and South Kivu and civil society organizations, as well as the international humanitarian community, which is expected, of course, to clean up the mess with no help from the Congolese government. But the operation will likely continue. So it's incumbent on us to look at what kind of changes can be made to minimize the damage of this immediate operation. More importantly, though, and this is very, very germane to hopefully your future, to begin to lay the groundwork for addressing the structural causes of the ongoing violence in a more effective way.
Reference to?
I was just pointing generally over this direction. The American flag, America. So speaking of structural causes, let's talk about for a minute the fuel. Why am I bantering on about these conflict minerals? I think in order to understand why this low, usually low, but sometimes higher intensity war in Eastern Congo continues to burn and churn with devastating consequences, we have to follow the money trail. Grievances surrounding land and identity, particularly vis-a-vis Congolese of Rwandan descent, they help, those are the issues that help organize the factions. But greed ensures that these conflicts remain violent and remain unsettled. I think the connection is utterly direct and undeniable, and we've been doing research on this for a number of years now, between the mining of gold and what we call the 3 Ts, tantalum, tungsten, and tin, on the one hand, and the deadliest war in the world on the other. There are local, regional, national root causes, as I just said, for this conflict, but the fuel for the fighting continues to come from conflict minerals. So you get a government army, you get rebels, you get paramilitary militias, you get neighboring armies and rebels who double as mafia outfits, jockeying for control of these mines, for the trading centers, for the tax routes, for the customs rackets, and the smuggling opportunities that this extraordinary bonanza, this century-long bonanza, provides. They fight for the self-imposed right to fleece Congo's population and its natural resource base. So you get mineral exploitation in the Congo pitting state-sponsored and militia, mafia systems against each other in competition for these extraordinary rents that accrue to the best positioned. By our reckoning at the Enough Project, the armed groups are able to rake in over $180 million a year through extortion, taxation, and smuggling associated with conflict minerals. Instead of drugs and prostitution, these mafia outfits are largely focused on minerals extraction and arms purchases. The whole trading chain is non-transparent because it provides huge opportunities for personal enrichment at each step along the way, as long as the process remains illegal and non-transparent. Now, part of the rationale for these conflicts over the elaborate mineral smuggling networks results from export taxes in the Congo being much higher than in neighboring countries, thus providing an incentive for export through these neighbors, particularly to the east. So smuggling becomes lucrative and logical. In many cases, given the number of hands through which these minerals pass, it represents a phenomenon that might be viewed as fraud amongst consenting armed groups. On our most recent trip here during the last month, in addition to visiting some of the mines in South Kivu, we also visited village markets in which minerals from mines controlled by the FDLR were being purchased right alongside minerals from mines controlled by the government army. We also visited some of the small buyers in Bukavu and Goma, where business is done in these little shacks, and minerals are again purchased without reference to where they originate. There's a whole underground economy in the East that is buying from the FDLR and the mines controlled by the FDLR. No statistics or notes of origin accompany these minerals. So right there at the local market, the challenge begins to disaggregate which minerals come from which mines of origin and who's being fueled by what. So let's turn our focus now for a minute to the FDLR and what to do about that specific conflict driver. The FDLR remains firmly entrenched in Eastern Congo with, I guess, estimates range from 4,500 to 6,000 strong. The organization continues to finance its activities through the mining of gold and tin, the smuggling of charcoal, the production of marijuana, and the taxation of populations in areas it controls, and of course, that support that continues to come from the diaspora FDLR leadership, which advertises in the web and is prominent individuals in Europe and America. The Kimia II operation, this government MONUC offensive against the FDLR, represents what we think is a whack-a-mole approach to counterinsurgency, and you know that doesn't work. The whacker, the Congolese government army, is doing as much damage to civilian populations as the mole, the FDLR. The entire approach is inadequate, and the costs far outweigh the potential benefits as this operation is presently constructed. So in order to succeed, and this is a long-term venture, civilian damage has to be dramatically reduced. The Congolese government's army discipline and performance has to improve dramatically. The mines have to become subject to the rule of law and transparency, and the military gains against FDLR positions have to be made sustainable. All these goals, I mean, it just goes without saying, all these goals are far outside the reach of the present Congolese and army and MONUC effort. What is needed, of course, is a rapid rethink of how to deal with the FDLR and the creation of and how long have we been talking about this, Howard? Since probably June 30th, 1994, a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy against what was the Interahamwe, then ALIR, and name whatever acronyms. Now they got the FDLR. I'm sure that'll change in a couple of years as sanctions mount against them. The creation of a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy that involves a number of elements that go far beyond this current military-only whack-a-mole strategy. It's indeed essential to remove the FDLR from the Congo, to reduce the human rights abuses that it's responsible for, and to restore Congolese sovereign control over its territory, to remove this pretext for further direct and indirect intervention by Rwanda. So dealing with the FDLR on a number of fronts is utterly imperative. But how can this be accomplished? That is the question. So we have who doesn't? I feel like John Kerry. I have a 5-point plan. Look how that got us. So I want to go very briefly through that, and then I want to get into the larger, okay, what do we do about Congo? So we think that the elements of a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy should include the following. Number one, we need to enhance military pressure. The current approach is utterly ridiculous, frankly, to rely on the FARDC to go after these guys. It's just going to make matters worse. Now, an effective approach, highly controversial, needs to be with all the right human rights safeguards, with international participation, meaning MONUC and other country participation, would be to allow joint operations between the Congolese and the Rwandan army. I'm talking about a 5-point plan. This is not the only point. This is one element, because the FDLR isn't going to go away without significant and serious military pressure being placed on it to drive it out of the mining areas that it controls, number one. Number two, we need to target these FDLR diaspora leadership. These guys need to be pressured much harder for their support. They have a major international network of support, including these FDLR commissioners around the world, including fundraising, including international money transfers. We need to prosecute these leaders domestically in Europe and the United States, and internationally through the International Criminal Court, using every possible legal angle. Remember Al Capone. War crimes, terrorist financing, money laundering, whatever, just chase and hound and harass, even if the lawsuits are ultimately unfavorable. Create a cost for this support from the FDLR international support, so it becomes so costly that the disincentives outweigh the incentives to continue. At a minimum, we should at least be putting a lot more resources into the UN group of experts that are working on the arms and the mineral issues there in Congo as they continue and deepen their investigation into the FDLR leaders who fan the flames of Congo's war. Third element of a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy is to strengthen the exit opportunities. for these militia, most of whom, as we all know now, very clearly did not participate in the 1994 genocide, but they are being held captive by their commanders who fear prosecution if they go back, and they are subject to radical disinformation about what would happen to them when they go home. It's always very interesting to go to the demob centers in Rwanda and talk to the ex-FDLR guys and to see their utter surprise about how different the situation is than what they were told. And we just need to do a much better job getting the information out there, how long we've been talking about that, and organizing the repatriation of these guys, or giving them alternative third country resettlement options, how long we've been talking about that. Fourth, again, this is a comprehensive strategy. You don't do one or two things. You have to do all of them if you want to succeed. That's what we do. When we want to succeed in something in North Korea and Iraq and Afghanistan, we do 5, 6, 7, 8 things at a time. In Africa, we fling one little thing at a problem and hope it might go away. I mean, it is utterly, utterly unsustainable, and it makes matters worse. So the fourth thing is to improve civilian protection. This is the I mean, it's a bridge that may be too far with current international resources. MONUC is, of course, attempting to improve or increase civilian protection efforts, with these civilian protection teams and stuff like that. But I say, just anecdotally, I think in Shabunda, which is the size of Rwanda, Shabunda territory, they have like 100 people. I mean, it's just like, who are you going to protect with 100 people? It's not that there's something wrong with the MONUC personnel. The concept of operation, the mandate, the political decisions by the United Nations Security Council are so utterly disconnected from what is happening on the ground in the Congo. It's just Alice in Wonderland. They make these broad pronouncements about we need to improve MONUC's capacity to protect civilians, but then you go to these places. You go to Kiwanja, where 150 people were dragged out of their houses and executed over a course of 2 nights, and there's a few dozen guys in a MONUC fleet. They don't have the language skills. They don't even know how to respond to these things. It is just a complete disconnect. This is not going to resolve anything. Yet we've hurled the largest peacekeeping mission in the entire world at this problem as if it is a solution. It's the law of the tool. If you have a nail, you just start banging on it. But it's not the right nail. It's not the right approach. And we are failing, and it's an expensive failure. We throw these billion-dollar boondoggles and go, oh, peacekeeping doesn't work. It's a political issue in New York. It is not an issue of performance. Yeah, you can improve what these guys are doing on the ground, but just, look who's there, look at the units, and it's a long, long road forward. So we can probably, through really, really hard work, enhance how you deploy units to areas that where especially women and girls are vulnerable, so that there are more and more units that are doing patrolling and that kind of stuff. That helps marginally. There's no question we can prevent some rapes. There's no question that maybe we can deter a few attacks. But this is not part of the solution in Congo. A peacekeeping mission, once peace is made, may make a contribution. A peacekeeping mission while a war is still going on is frankly a silly policy response. The fifth thing in a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy against the FDLR would be to secure and legalize the former FDLR mining operations. So, when they knock the FDLR out and the CNDP goes in with Bosco and other people in the charge of this place, smuggling the stuff out through Rwanda, is this an improvement? I don't think so. It just continues the rationale for low-level conflict in Congo. Okay, so that's the FDLR. FDLR is one piece of the puzzle. Good luck. I'm coming in for a landing here. The FDLR, one needs, of course, a comprehensive strategy. And Congo is such a complex. I've worked on conflicts in Africa now for 25 years. Congo is certainly by far, without any close second, the most complicated one in Africa and the most complicated one I've ever worked on. And I think there is a framework. One needs to come up with, I think, a framework that where things can fit, where we can at least see what the universe of the requirements are. And we would put them into, at the Enough Project, we would put them into an approach in a framework that we would call the 3 Ps. And that's protection, punishment, and peacemaking. Let me go through them very, very quickly, because I do think that this encompasses the complicated but necessary comprehensive strategy to help support and to bringing about an end to the war in Congo. First is protection of people. We've got to make a very, very important political decision. We've got to make, I think, a major multilateral, diplomatically supported, highly human rights conditioned, decade-long commitment to help reform this Congolese army. I don't know one Congolese that I've ever spoken to that doesn't say at the center of everything is a reform of this security services in the Congo, including all the vetting of these war criminals that are running the army, so that it becomes a source of security for the civilian population rather than predation. We've got all kinds of lessons on how to do this stuff, and there are people even in this audience who know a lot about this stuff. We just have to make this kind of a commitment, multi-donor commitment, to a long-term approach. Now, we have an opportunity because MONUC with 17,000 or 18,000 people, personnel on the ground, is there, and you can embed, you can do a lot of training, you can do a lot of things to get the ball rolling, to jumpstart the process of real reform. And if you took a small percentage of MONUC's budget, I think, and invested over 10 years in army reform, it might be the best investment donors can make in defense of human rights in the Congo. And given, by the way, China's massive stake in the mineral sector there in Congo, we ought to be going to Beijing soon and engaging with China to do this together. Get them engaged and involved because they have a long-term interest in stability. Otherwise, their contracts are going to be meaningless, as they are finding out very rapidly as their learning curve hits them in the back of the head. Second part of the protection element of a comprehensive strategy is the Security Council needs to continue to work to focus MONUC's capacities, the capacities that it gives it, on the protection of the most vulnerable areas, civilian populations in the East. Again, you're only going to get a small percentage of that population, but at least try, target in, do something that means something to the people. I've been struck by some of the focus group studies that have been done by some of the organizations on the ground in Congo, where Congolese after Congolese group and individuals are interviewed, and not one person says they have any knowledge ever of any MONUC personnel protecting any civilians. That is a legacy of failure we have to reverse, and I think we can reverse it by targeting in with very specific kinds of operations. The third element of the protection is this FDLR campaign. I think that is doing an FDLR counterinsurgency strategy right is critically important. So again, protection, punishment, peace. So that's the protection element. The punishment element, I think, ultimately, accountability is at the core. Breaking the cycle of impunity. We talk about that. People make speeches about that every week with respect to Congo, Sudan, and other countries which are long-term conflict arenas. And we need, just like with army reform, we need to make the same kind of investment over time in the justice sector, military and civilian justice sector in the Congo, so that the system can begin to prosecute the warlords who use rape, village burning, and other attacks on civilians as their tool of choice in pursuing their objectives, mostly financial. Second element of punishment and accountability, we need, I think, to focus on countering the incentives for violence that exist now, and you apply and implement and ensure mechanisms for implementation, the application of sanctions, of asset freezes, of ICC prosecutions, targeted military operations, diplomatic isolation, focused arms embargo enforcement with penalties, and then resource export control mechanisms. All these tools, these penalties, these pressures, these punishments, whatever you want to call them, in the toolbox need to be broken out and figured out how they can be targeted against some of the worst abusers of human rights in the Congo, both state and non-state actors, and in the region. The ICC, thirdly, in the punishing perpetrators category, the ICC, I think we need to really, even though the United States is in a strange position vis-a-vis the ICC, there is a great deal of flexibility in the prosecutor's office, and I think we need to hear, that office needs to hear from the United States very strongly that prosecution of some of these war leaders in Kivus for the use of rape as a tool of war, for the kind of attacks against civilians that qualify as crimes against humanity and war crimes, need to be the focus of ever-expanding investigations and legal action by the ICC in the Kivus. Ituri, as they begin their cases in Ituri, we need to expand the investigations and begin to indict some of these guys or issue arrest warrants for some of the ones in the Kivus. Yes, it will be destabilizing. Yes, peace and justice don't go hand in hand. We'll do another session on that if they delay Howard's appointment another few months. The U.S. and EU, fourth and finally on the punishing perpetrators, the U.S. and EU need to make, and this is an important point we tried to make at the hearing that Senator Boxer and Senator Feingold had a month or two ago. The U.S. and EU need to make ending violence against women and girls a central part of their diplomatic engagement and their aid conditionality with the governments in the Congo and Rwanda, instead of stovepiping the issue, marginalizing the issue into some gender programming category. The Congolese government needs to be held accountable by donors and diplomats for its army's abuses of women and girls, and Rwanda should be as well for its abuses of civilians, particularly women and girls, in the context of its own incursions into Congo and its support for Congolese proxies like the CNDP. Okay, we've got protection, we've got punishment, now peacemaking, promoting the peace. There's only two elements here that I would, because there are many others, but just for brevity's sake. The U.S. needs to invest heavily. The U.S. has this comparative advantage in both Kinshasa and Kigali. It's one of the few countries that has strong relations with both sides, that has some influence. We need to build our leverage and use our leverage in both capitals and help to try to accelerate the rapprochement between the two countries. That relationship is, of course, one of the many central elements, one of the many conflict drivers in Central Africa, and if we can maintain the thawing, the détente between the two, that will be, of course, a very, very important element of the larger strategy. Working with Obasanjo and Mkapa, of course, to do that would be crucial. And then secondly, on the peacemaking front, back to where we started, American and European and Asian consumers of electronics products and jewelry, especially in the context of gold, if these campaigns that are now being launched by a number of NGOs, including ours, working all together, if they are somewhat successful, and some of the legislation that's just been introduced, the bill that's just been introduced in the Senate by Durbin and Feingold and Senator Brownback, and a House version is being contemplated now, so that it will be a little stronger, take some of the points that were missing in the Senate bill. If these are somewhat successful, I think, aimed at encouraging industry actors, the electronics industry, to the lesser extent jewelry industry, to stop buying conflict minerals and support the rule of law and transparency in the Congolese mining sector. This is where we believe will be a central element of peacemaking in the long run in Eastern Congo. When consumers begin demanding conflict-free jewelry, rape-free cell phones, when it starts going more widely over the internet, this kind of campaigning, consumer campaigning, like we had with respect to blood diamonds, which did not have, by and large, in the 90s and the early part of this decade, the advantage of the kind of internet-fueled advocacy that we have today. I think we'll start to see the groundwork for change being laid. The ultimate objective, and here we are, the ultimate objective is to transform minerals from their present status as the fuel that continues this horrific conflict in Congo, to turn these minerals into an engine of empowerment and development for the whole country. If this can occur, then I think peace becomes possible in Congo. Thanks for putting up for me, Doc.
John, thank you so much. We haven't talked recently about any of this, and so I sent a memo over to some friends of mine recently, just the last few days ago, expressing my own significant anxieties about this MONUC FARDC operation, both in terms of the humanitarian disaster that was about to happen, the military disaster that was about to be produced, but also I think this is another threat to MONUC's credibility, which threatens to further marginalize MONUC,
Very much.
which is not in very good stead in much of the population. So for lots of reasons, I understand it's well-intentioned. I understand the pressures that the Monic is under to try to do something and so on. But boy, I fully share what you were laying out. I want to just offer, to get the conversation begun, a few footnotes to what you said besides that one. You made the point, and I think it's important, that you put it somewhat narrowly. You talk about, regularizing or legalizing the mines once the control is seized from the FDLR. The broader issue is creating a regional economic framework. Because at the end of the day, if you have an economically integrated region governed by the rule of law and various kinds of trade agreements and as between the states of the region, there's no reason that many of the people who are benefiting from the illegal mineral trade will not continue to benefit, because the natural flow of economic transactions is still going to be very heavily toward the east and Rwanda and so on. And so that, I think, ought to be a central element of kind of a long, medium-term policy that we ought to be very engaged in trying to strengthen. As long as the violence continues, it's very difficult to make that work. But that clearly, I just wanted to broaden the frame on that a little bit. Thirdly, you talk about, and I again concur, about the overwhelming importance of strengthening the FARDC. I mean, there's no there. And it's absurd to think of this as anything other than, I use this very language in another memo I did about a 10-year project. I mean, this is really multinational, 10 years. But the one thing that continues to frustrate me about this is the continued tendency of everyone involved in security sector reform in Europe, and I think in the United States, is thinking purely in technical terms. It's as if we simply pull people together, do military doctrine, teach military discipline, teach human rights doctrine, et cetera. When the fundamental problem, in terms of sequencing, is the political issue. That you have all these disparate elements that have got to be integrated into a integrated national command structure. And as we were focused on in Burundi quite successfully, where we actually brought all the elements together to train them in building collaborative capacity, to break down the zero-sum game, the mentality, the beginning to build some recognition of interdependence, to build some trust, some relationships among these key actors, to give them skills to begin to organize themselves as a common unit. I would argue there's nothing more important than that specific, might call it process training, but the building of cohesion within the national command structure, which is not going to come about by conventional, rational, didactic approaches that we use in military training. You need that other, but you've got to do this as the sequential priority. We're expected to do that. That is the Wilson Center activity in Congo has in its game plan this next 12-month period to begin that work with that kind of reform. Got to get Kabila's okay, but since we've already been working with the 8th and 10th military regions in the Kivus, the military has asked us to do this, so I think we'll be able to mount that. But I just want to kind of elevate that in your discussion as well as our general policy discussion. And then finally...
Can I make a quick point, addition, a footnote to your footnote, which would be, that you made the statement that the problem is also a political issue, and I think that's very important because army reform is not technical, it's political, but it's also economic. It's all.
The payment becomes even salaries, absolutely.
Not only salaries, it's that elements in Kinshasa are using the army as an instrument for rent seeking, for taxation, for smuggling, and so the whole framework, the fuel for the conflict. The FDLR, the CNDP, and the FARDC as sort of the three major players are all have a rationale. Their rationale for their use of force is for economic gain.
That's a very important point, and that actually does lead to my last point. Which was Kinshasa, because the one thing that didn't pop out was, in the past we've always been very focused on Kinshasa's complicity in what was happening in the East because of their historic ties to the FDLR and to the Mai Mai elements and so on. And that's the piece that's still and though that has been somewhat altered by this new dynamic of Rwandan cooperation and by their willingness to go after the FDLR in some respects, the economic linkages are still there for some elements of the army. So it's not an integrated, organized, institutionalized army. But the broader issue is the constancy of the national government, I think. I was very personally, concerned about the conflict that emerged between Kamere and Speaker of the National Assembly and Kabila and the moving out of the National Assembly of Kamere. I mean, there are issues there that are going to have to be resolved and are symptomatic, I think, of what you're describing. And unless that's resolved, the problems of the East cannot be resolved. They are directly tied to Kinshasa. And so I think there's a holistic approach to this thing that's going to be required here. Those are the elements I just alluded to.
Yep.
Okay, let's open up for questions, please. Identify yourself. We'll have microphones moving around. More questions than we'll be able to take. Let's start right there.
Hi, I'm Brian Klein with the Woodrow Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. And my question, thank you for your comments. It's really a pleasure to hear you folks illuminate the situation. And so a lot of the focus in your comments was on the mineral dynamic, and you mentioned charcoal in passing. And I just wanted to flesh out a little bit what role charcoal is playing, if it's similar to what the mineral situation is, and if there are better opportunities to address the situation by monitoring what's going on with logging and charcoal.
There are sections of some of the forests which are just being clear cut, so that and charcoal is in great demand in Rwanda. So a lot of it gets smuggled across the border. I think Rwanda banned charcoal production internally, indigenously.
Say that again.
Somebody can. I see heads nodding, so I know I'm on the right track. Rwanda basically issued a law banning charcoal production.
Ban. Oh.
Banned, yes. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think it was banned, and I was trying to understand the
So anyways, no laughing matter. So they there's all this demand now, pent-up demand, and so where there's some demand, there will be a supply, and everything's for sale in Congo. So you get these, particularly FDLR units in the forest there, going chopping this stuff down, burning it up, sending it across the border, all complicit. I mean, this is where you get the really bizarre economic relationships and trading patterns between Rwandan businessmen closely associated with the government in Kigali, working pretty directly with the FDLR to make a few bucks. I mean, it's just sick. So, I mean, we just have to keep exposing it and finding, again, you talked about the regional economic framework. It's working on the regional economic framework equally assiduously with working on legalizing or creating the rule of law within the Congo. So both are equally important. Do one without the other, and nothing will change. So in this case, it's both. It's dealing with that demand, which is clearly exploitative, as so much of the relationship is between those two countries. But it's also introducing some element of the rule of law about this kind of activity, economic activity inside Congo. These are big, big leaps. But again, you start with exposing, you start with putting pressure, you start with looking at alternatives, which you would have a lot more to say about than I would, than I would even understand. And there are answers to it. It's just a thorny sub-issue embedded in the whole other context of exploitation of resources, which goes back over a century.
Let's take a few questions at a time. We'll package them together, okay? Right there and then over here.
Mr. Prendergast, thank you for your comments. Brian Stout, USAID, Conflict Management Office. I wanted you to speak to, if you could for a moment, to the connection, if any, you see between the mineral question and underlying issues of land tenure and property rights, particularly in the eastern provinces. Do you think it's possible to address conflict minerals without simultaneously addressing the customary land tenure and the property rights issues in those provinces? Thanks.
And here?
My name is Makoto Crane. I'm an independent journalist, just recently came back from Democratic Republic of Congo. And my question to you is that, or I just want to proceed with a statement, is that we know that Canada, Sweden, and Netherlands just recently withdrew aid from Rwanda, which is one of the main aggressors in Congo, as a form of diplomatic pressure, international diplomatic pressure. And if we know that works, why is the U.S. not following that policy? Also, you mentioned about the lack of transparency in the mining and in the mining industries. And my question is that we know the U.S. corporations that are directly involved in fueling the conflict, such as the OM Group, Freeport McMoran in Arizona. How come those links aren't being directly addressed,
Okay.
U.S. corporations?
And one last question here, right over here.
Hi, I'm Christa Relief from Oxfam America. And I just wanted to wholeheartedly agree with John about the civilian impacts of the joint military operations and both of the joint military operations. And in fact, in South Kivu, where they haven't really done major offensive operations against the FDLR, there's been a huge impact on civilians. So they haven't even started, literally, and there's a huge negative impact on civilians that we've noted in our visits out in the field, and we have programming out in North and South Kivu. And I saw during my trip as well a lot of the impacts and heard about the impacts, obviously, in Lubero, where we're also responding, burning of homes, et cetera. But I wanted to address or have a question about MONUC and the fact that you mentioned it's a bit of a bridge too far for them to fully protect civilians. But I wanted to add that the primary threat to civilians right now is this operation. So you know, for MONUC to protect people at the same time that they're supporting a joint operation that's actually abusing people, that's resulting in the abuse of people by all of the armed groups, not just one, is something important to note. And I think, you know, some of the things you mentioned about MONUC communications with communities, they can do improvements on the ground in specific areas, and we're in contact indirectly with them about some of those improvements they can make. And in fact, in Kiwanja, where the massacres were held, they have actually made some improvements, but it's an individual initiative that's happening there by an Indian commander. It's not systematized across the MONUC structure. And so that's the kind of thing that could improve civilian protection. But I think the key is this question of the joint military operation, which has done nothing but increase civilian suffering. And just the last point would be on the arms embargo. You kind of glazed over it a little bit, but I'm just wondering how important you think that is in terms of MONUC's role or whoever's role or somebody's role to actually deal with that, because obviously it's not being handled at this point in terms of the arms flow that's coming in. Thank you. Sorry to be so long.
Okay. I love these one-part questions. John asked me to take the first of those questions, I'm not sure why, regarding the land and the mining in relation to the mining questions and issues of land tenure and land conflict.
Because you've been working on this.
Well, yeah, but
Don't be so humble.
I haven't been out there for a few months. But I think these are really quite separable. I mean, you do have major issues related to land tenure, land conflicts, herder, farmer conflicts, conflicts over the role of the more economically prosperous Tutsi community in parts of the Kivus and tensions with other elements within their region. Those are really quite manageable in my experience, and we've done a lot of work in helping to bring communities that were experiencing considerable tension and conflict around those. And I think, but that's separable. The mining issue is out there because it's, but it doesn't have much to do with these other questions of who controls the land. And it's really quite separable analytically, I think. That's my quick reaction.
Yeah, great. I think I counted 5 more questions here, so let's give it a shot. The question of aid conditionality with Rwanda. I think the United States needs a more mature relationship with Rwanda. We need to use, and we don't have to get on the bully pulpit. We don't have to do all this by press release, you know. But if we're going to provide significant amounts of budget support, if we're going to provide significant amounts of, along with our European allied donors, a significant percentage of Rwanda's operating budget on an annual basis. We can, on the one hand, be supportive of some of the important forward movement that this government, important achievements that this government has been responsible for inside the borders of Rwanda since the genocide. It's very controversial issues. We can again yet another session after, in case you get held up there. But what Rwanda is doing across the border in Congo, and what it has done now since the overthrow of Mobutu, I mean, it just is simply unacceptable in a bilateral relationship to conduct business as usual relations. And so I think we need to look at all of the tools, including a reduction in support for particular budget categories, but in the context of strong engagement and dialogue about what our objectives are and what our shared objectives are with the people of Eastern Congo, who ought to matter first. And so the kind of extraction, the kind of intervention, the kind of illegal smuggling operations, the kind of fuel for the conflict that Rwanda has generated now for 13 years, is it has to change. I mean, or else we can't continue along a business as usual path. I don't know how to be more clear, because I think it requires a complete overhaul of how we relate to Rwanda. Now that it is on its feet, and it is every day I open up a new magazine and Rwanda is the new Singapore. And so this is now time for us to treat this country in a very mature fashion and look at the places where we agree and places where we disagree, and if these disagreements are fairly major, and if the implications of the disagreements result in massive human suffering, we have to take some stands. And not just press releases and little statements and insertion in speeches. These don't mean anything. People have discounted American rhetoric for a long time now, and we need to act. And so I think in the context of our ongoing relations with Rwanda, we ought to be reviewing that very, very significantly, but in the context of strong engagement. I feel the same way, and as a person who's been a hardliner on Sudan, I feel the same way on Sudan, as you engage strongly at all points in time, even if you're pressuring a particular country to change its approach. So I think that's just across the board a way we ought to be doing, and standing for some principles, which we are. Sorry, I knew it sparked something over there. Yes. Yeah,
it does. One of the things that we had discussed with the State Department a couple of years ago, but which we hope we'll be able to implement in the near term, is a really serious effort at trying to strengthen regional integration with a regional initiative that would bring together key security sector players and try to get them involved and help them to build a new security architecture to build some trust and confidence amongst them. Both I think it's the Swedish and I think the British governments, as well as the American government, are very supportive of that kind of initiative. So that's one of the things I'm hoping we'll be able to
multiple tracks. One track, utterly critical, is continued dialogue or intensified dialogue regionally about economic relationships. But let's go back here, because it's utterly important, I think, and that is that we need to, I think, we need to look at the way that Rwanda is dealing with Congo, and we need to look at the case that you've provided here, which is when a few of these, they're mid-level, smaller to mid-level donors, decided to cut their assistance to Rwanda. It helped. It was one of a number of factors that drove Kigali to make the deal with Congo, to take down Nkunda and undertake this operation. It was an attempt to mollify donors. So they shifted the dynamic in Central Africa in a way that no one predicted. All people were hoping for at that time was maybe they'd have some dialogue, maybe they could come up with some small little deal, and suddenly Congo's allowing Rwandan forces into its soil, and Rwanda's taking down the head of the CNDP. I mean, it went so far beyond what most of the diplomats were looking for, and that's what Rwanda's capable of doing if it feels some pressure. So I think that is, in fact, part of the model that needs to be utilized going forward, not willy-nilly, but in very strategic ways, as part of a larger policy objective, a comprehensive policy objective that the United States works with other countries to introduce, that focuses on peace in Central Africa. This issue of the multinational corporations, is a complicated one, because there are American companies like Freeport in there, but these companies are not in the areas which are where conflict is occurring. So I feel that well, you disagree, but anyways, urgent efforts need to be made equally for the again, the rule of law within the mining sector in Congo. If you can, and the United States and other countries in Europe and Asia whose companies are going and investing in Congo in a very extractive way, when it's not within the rule of law, then the United States government has to look at that. So on a case-by-case basis, we need to look. What we're talking about in Eastern Congo is a chain of custody that occurs. Let's just take it from the mine itself, because I just did this. You start in a mine, whether it's cassiterite or gold or wolframite or coltan, and that mineral is mined, and it is usually mined, and it's heavily taxed by the armed group in control of the particular area. It goes to one of these local markets. It's sold to some negociant, they call them. These guys collect it all together. They move it to the regional urban centers in Bukavu and Goma, who then sell their stuff to the comptoir. It's all mixed together at this point. Most of it's smuggled. Probably 10% of the production of minerals in Eastern Congo is legal and captured by official statistics and taxed through the proper Congolese system. And then it's bought. These various minerals are bought then by mineral purchasing companies, some of them based in Europe, often based in Asia, and a lot of smelting goes on mostly in East Asia. And then they in turn get sold to the components manufacturers, people who do circuit boards and other kinds of things, who then in turn sell them to Apple and Hewlett-Packard and the rest of that stuff, or the jewelry companies. So that's a hell of a long chain to follow through. And that's the chain, though, that we're talking about, I think, that goes from your iPod to the competition between the FDLR and the CNDP over a particular mine yesterday. So that's the direct link between violence in Congo and you turning on your iPod is pretty indisputable. It is murky, and it is non-transparent for a reason. But that's the particular chain that we're talking about. What you're speaking about is U.S. multinational corporate direct investment in some of the mineral exploitation in central and southern Congo is also equally problematic, disturbing, and needs to be addressed. It's not my area of expertise, so I'm simply going to defer the question and tell you that I do think they're different sides of a similar coin of a lack of transparency and legality in an economic system there in Congo, and a willingness by international actors, whether regional or international, multinational, to exploit that deliberately weakened state so that everybody benefits but the people of Congo. Christa, we got 3 quickies. I think that, yes, let's just say quickly there are improvements. I want to restate, I might have been too negative about Monarch. There are improvements that can be made on a day-to-day basis, in location by location, which can, in fact, increase the diligence of protection of particular groups of people. And I think it's really important that Monarch increase its dialogue with the organizations that are working in these areas so that they can figure out ways to deploy their forces that maximize civilian protection. That should be a daily, and it is true, it's quite striking, in fact, and proves the point that you can go to one Monarch unit and see a very proactive commander trying to do things like undertake these kinds of deployments that are focused on protecting people at different points of vulnerability, and then others that sit in their barracks. I mean, it's a very wide behavioral gap between these groups, and so I think that can be a source of improvement. Second, it is, I think, the elephant in the living room now in Congo today is should the international community continue to support this military offensive when we know it's going to fail, and we know that the already documented increase in horrific human rights violations are only going to increase. I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer, but it is not the subject of a debate at the Security Council today like you would expect it to be, given that it's the repercussions of these actions are so profound in terms of human suffering. So I think that, again, brings it to us in this room and people that care about this issue, is it's incumbent on us to make it a political issue, so that that the United States can bring this issue to the Security Council and they can talk about what needs to be done, because MONUC's unquestioning support for this thing is going to not only increase civilian damage, but it's also going to damage MONUC, is what you said earlier. And then finally, the arms embargo. Well, I mean, it's further support to the UN group of experts and their recommendations. I think there's a great team that they've had over the last couple of years, putting more and more evidence together of where these networks are coming from, the intersection between the arms smuggling and the mineral smuggling is just direct and indisputable now. We know what needs to be done. It's just the political will to do it.
Great. I'm going to ask Steve to take the chair now, John, while I head out.
Good luck.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, that's all right.
I think that's also the signal that we're probably at the point of our last round of questions. After we get about 3 more questions here, that'll be about the end of our time. So as soon as we have said our goodbyes, we'll begin.
Sorry.
Okay, let me recognize one right in the middle there. Yep. And we'll take 3 questions, and that will be our last round.
This is Bahati Jacques. I'm with Africa Faith and Justice Network. John, thank you for your remarks. Are really, really very significant to the Congolese story. My question is, why didn't you refer to a possibility of the Rwandan government holding dialogue with FDLR? The Congolese government has been negotiating with the rebel groups internally. Why not Rwanda doing the same? It seems to me that the Congolese government is taking orders from Rwanda to just combat and militarily go after FDLR and ignoring peaceful means to the Rwandan problem. In addition to that, maybe the Rwandan government is afraid of significant stories of crime and killing of the Hutus that it has to be told. And that story, unless it's told, Rwanda will not be at peace, and Congo, therefore, will not be at peace. Regarding the taxation by CNDP, the report by the United Nations S 2009/253 says that the Congolese government has unofficially allowed them to do so. This is paragraph 23, where because they can't pay the new integrated CNDP soldiers, so those who are not integrated had to be cared for. So my question is, can we have a program that provincial government can carry on, collect those taxes, and then really help the integration process go forward? And finally, the same report says in paragraph 23 that there are negotiations of a possibility of imposing a new governor in North Kivu and the division of the province to serve the interests of both Rwanda and DRC. Is this a new idea of...
Say it again, sorry.
To serve the interests of Rwanda?
This was the UN report said, then I missed the part before.
Yeah, the UN report S /2009/253, paragraph 22, says that there is a negotiation between Rwanda and Congo to impose a new governor, and to divide the North Kivu province in 2 provinces, whereas we have more cattle for the Tutsi community and so on. Don't you see this as a another issue that is being created?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, please, my friends, ask one question. I was polite and let you get through 3 questions. I was going to allow only 3 questions entirely. Please give time for the other people who are recognized to ask. We're staying in the back here because I think my far-sighted friend Howard couldn't see the back end of the room. So.
Thank you very much. John, I like your presentation. It fully, took everything into consideration, the complexity of the situation in DRC. And in terms of framework, your action plan, the action plan is very good too. But unfortunately, Howard is gone. But I would like you to take into consideration his suggestion. The national command structure is very important because those people being the head of everything, if you don't do anything with those people, nothing can happen.
The national what?
The national command structure.
Oh, command, okay.
Yeah.
Command, yeah.
And in addition to that, I just want to, because in your findings, you know that the military, they are not disciplined. So the first thing to do in terms of sovereignty is to have action to discipline the army so that they can take control, have better control of their country. Otherwise, anything that you can implement later in terms of peace building, if the army is not there to guarantee security, it kind of will be a failure. And we have said it, MONUC, they need to, the UN has to give them a clear mandate because the current mandate doesn't allow them to protect the civilians. We have, factors there to demonstrate that. In addition to that, they have to be more educated too because you have heard about the immoral activity they have been involved in. That's not good. And then the last point is when you are suggesting to go to Beijing because the current government is signing, contracts in the mining sector. That's issue is very sensitive because the current president made the decision to sign with China. And then he said, that's my sovereignty to sign with any country I wish to sign a contract with. And Howard was saying before that Vital Kamerhe, the guy from the National Assembly, he was forced to go out. And one of the reasons of his dispatcher is related to the mining sector. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to have one more question. We went from 3 questions a person to 2 questions a person. Now, please, only one question.
Yes. My question is why Laurent Nkunda is taking so long to extradite him to Congo?
Oh, you don't have another one? Because that's real easy, of course.
Okay, well, let's take one more. You gave us time. Right here, the man in the orange shirt.
Thank you. I want just to ask this. I agree with everything you said, John. Your plan is very good. But I think the DRC is facing a problem of leadership. If we don't have a responsible, strong, loyal, and patriotic government in the Congo, nothing is going to work of everything you just said here. And everybody knows actually that the government that is ruling the DRC wasn't really elected by the Congolese people. Everybody knows and without doubt that Kabila and everybody ruling the Congo around him stole the election from the Congolese. And 2 years from now, I think we're going to have to go to election in the Congo. How can the US assist the Congolese people that this election really take place and that this election be free and transparent? Because we want to get rid of this guy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry not to take any more questions, but the rule of good theatrics is to always leave them wanting more. So, and John has plenty to talk about here.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So, Bahati, great questions. Thank you. This is a very thorny question about whether, and of course since the middle of 1994, it has been on the table. Should the Rwandan government negotiate with the organization that the organizations that came across the border, and then now the ones that have inherited that legacy, and in the form of the FDLR, I think I personally, and by the way, you seem to link that issue with the need to spotlight the atrocities that the Rwandan government has been responsible for. I don't think they necessarily need to be linked. We need to do what you're suggesting. There needs to be impartial advocacy for the victims and survivors of human rights atrocities, no matter who perpetrates them. So let me just say, in principle, the United States policy will be more credible if we do that much more robustly and aggressively going forward. I don't know whether we will or not, but certainly we as advocates and activists and people who care about what's happening in Congo need to demand that every human life, no matter where they are and who do whatever to them, needs to be valued and defended. And so, however, I think we will probably disagree on this, and it is I think an issue where I hope that you would accept that well-meaning people can disagree for principled reasons. I do think that though the vast majority of the FDLR, from all that we can tell, did not participate in the genocide in 1994, there still is a core group of leaders that control the organization. And as long as that's the case, I just think there are certain things that are politically possible and certain things that are not politically possible. And I believe that it is not politically possible, even if we cut all of the United States aid and we conditioned it all and said the only thing that will allow us to restore bilateral relations with Rwanda is if they negotiate with the FDLR. I just don't think they will. I think it is the red line that will not be crossed. And frankly, I'm torn on it, but I would probably land on the side of opposing the kind of direct negotiations that conventional diplomacy would produce. What I do think would be very, very useful and a move beyond the status quo is to open up much more assertively dialogue with as many elements within the FDLR as possible in order to frame their alternatives to continued conflict. And that means reintegration for the vast, vast majority, 80–90% of the FDLR, and the reintegration channels are, fairly open. And I've spent a lot of time looking at them, and I don't think people are getting lined up anywhere and shot or anything like that. And so, and then resettlement options as well. And I know we're disagreeing on this point, but that's where I stand. The second issue you raised, what was it? The
text, the CNDP. Government allowing them to.
I think it was that you can't pay the if we can't pay the army, that that the whole way forward be blocked. I think that the essence of security sector reform is not just, and this sort of gets to the point Howard was making, it's not just a technical exercise in improving the command structure of the Army and whatever, but it's creating a sustainable security system that, where the mineral sector is legalized so that it can be taxed. And so 90% of the revenues that accrue from the extraordinary natural resource base of the Congo don't line people's pockets or go into arms trade, but rather go into the state coffers so that the army can be paid and schools can be built and health care can be provided. I mean, eventually, a functioning Congolese state, that's the objective. So we've got to take the incremental steps one by one moving forward. And that's why part of our efforts at Enough Project continuously snaps back to this question of how are we going to deal with this mineral issue? Because until the status quo in buying minerals illegally is disrupted, the system will not change. There is too much money to be made in hollowing out the state like a termite-ridden structure that it is, and just eating the assets, privatizing the assets, and just like we've seen. By the way, this isn't a Congolese phenomenon. Look what the hell happened in our banking system. We privatized these illegal gotten gains, and now the public gets to pay the bill. This is what governments do and institutions do throughout history. Individuals within institutions try to take advantage of it. And if there's no restrictions, no restraints, and the logic is take advantage, and there's a lot of money to be made, it's going to happen. So that has to be reformed. And army reform isn't going to occur outside of the context of systemic reform of how the Congolese state pays for itself and its essential responsibilities as a state. The issue of, again, it goes back to this question of how we deal with Rwanda, the question of this thing you were reading in the UN report about the imposition of a governor that would more readily work on a kind of a deal for the resources between Rwanda and Congo. I just think that kind of fairly brazen exploitation of a neighbor is simply unacceptable. And if we had if we were not so asleep at the wheel with respect to how Rwanda projects its power across the border, then we would be all over that. But, we're caught in the midst of a transition. Johnny's just getting into office. We don't have the special envoy yet. I'm not really sure what the embassy's doing there in Kigali or in Kinshasa, but certainly they ought to be screaming at the top of their lungs about these kinds of issues. We need to have more assertive diplomacy. It's the United States of America. Why we stand aside for these kind of things, I don't understand. We got to stand up for these principles. Basic sovereignty. This is not a hard one to try to kind of figure out what's the right thing to do. A second set of questions about the
back to Army reform.
Yeah. The National Army Command structure. I just think that military justice has to be a central component of U.S. engagement, and especially this is one of these things where some people just ideologically don't want the U.S. military anywhere in Africa, and I don't. I feel like there is a very important role that professional military training can play in supporting the gradual evolution of militaries to, and just like ours, got off the ground 250 years ago and was replete with all kinds of problems and human rights issues and military justice questions, over time, and we still have them. And over time, you develop as a military, and the more help you can get, the better. And I think that the U.S. could play a major role in helping, along with other donors, helping the military justice system develop. And then, again, not just making it, and Howard's point needs to echo over and over again, you can't make these military reforms and security sector reforms simply technical exercises. They are fundamentally political, meaning they have to be at the top of the charts when our diplomats go in and meet with President Kabila and others and across the border. And we need to go into these issues on the political side as much as we are doing it on the military side. On the issue of China, again, it's a question of what we want the world to be versus what the world is. China is here in a big way, and they are looking voraciously for minerals on the cheap, and they're cutting deals with anybody who has these minerals because their growth prospects are completely off the charts, and they need this stuff as the fuel for their economic explosion. And so they're coming. So the question is, do you just sit on the sidelines and say, oh, China shouldn't do this or China shouldn't, or do you try to influence their behavior and try to hopefully put them into a more constructive framework? And I think that in this case, China has and it's the same in Sudan, frankly. And I just see this as an incredible opportunity for the Obama administration if they'll seize it. The two biggest wars in the world, Sudan and Congo, it turns out, that China is a massive multi-billion-dollar investor in both of the mineral sectors in these countries. And again, they're not the cause of the war, but they help to fuel it. So with high-level, fairly robust diplomacy, which doesn't exist right now, with the Chinese in Beijing, respecting not just having some meeting where there's 36 issues on the agenda here in New York with the Chinese permanent representative to the UN, and it's like 28. We say, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we worked together in Congo? 29. You know, like, we've got to go and say, this matters to us. Look at how we can work together on this. This is something, particularly in the context of security sector reform, that we think China could play a major role with us. Let's do it. You've got some money. You have, just like in Sudan, you don't want the war to resume in southern Sudan, and the first target will be the Sudanese oil installations. You don't want this war to continue and to spread, and the illegality in the contracting, in the process of contracting in Congo's mining sector to continue to undermine your potential profits. Let's work together on this one. The third set of questions is, where is it? See, in Kunda. Oh
Third
man,
question.
I tell you, third one. Yeah, that was a doozy. I think you're not. I think you're simply asking why. You probably know. So, anyways, I'll humor you with an answer. I think that I think Rwanda is holding it as a bargaining chip. You know, let's just see. Let's see what the Congolese government does. If this thing falls apart, if the CNDP integration doesn't work, if eventually the relationship sours, well, hey, Nkunda has a constituency, you know, in Eastern Congo. It's a very small but extremely economically important constituency, and they don't want to throw him under the bus. They kind of dangling him under the bus right now, but they didn't throw him. And it's typical Rwandan behavior. It's playing all the angles at once. And since they're playing them 24 hours a day, and everyone else is playing like 8 or 9 or 10, usually they're a step ahead of everyone else. So they got Congo on their side now temporarily. CNDP's in. They've got Nkunda, which has satisfied international donors, as you asked about before, but they haven't kind of given them up, and no one's really pressuring them because they feel like, well, maybe that would be too destabilizing right now. Let's just see what happens. Diplomat's famous last words. And, why change the status quo? What's the pressure? There is no pressure. Why turn him over when he's such an asset to hold on to? I think that's why he's still there. And he will be there for a while until something changes, and then Rwanda will assess the circumstances and do whatever is in Rwanda's interest. And then finally, on the question of leadership, where is that again? Where did that come from?
Right there.
Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry. I don't think there was a Congolese person I met in the last 10 years in the Kivus who doesn't believe this from the bottom of their heart. That this is a question of leadership. Everyone, of course, takes their shots, understandably, against the Rwandans. But as somebody said to me, a variation on this theme, if we had some Congolese somewhere in, I don't know where we were in South Kivu, and it says if we had, a strong state, then these neighbors, these predators, wouldn't be allowed to come. We wouldn't be able to come in. We could defend our sovereignty. If we had leadership, that looked out for Congo and its resources and its people, then we could basically support. Because we'd be a strong state, we'd be able to do all the things that everybody wants to see happen for Congo's future. So I think that leadership is a absolutely intangible but most important issue. And you asked, okay, so how can the U.S., in the context of the elections coming in 2 years, how can we then support better leadership in Congo? And I think that ultimately, and I'll give you a couple of palliatives, and then hopefully it'll mean something in the aggregate, that it's got to be the Congolese that find their leadership and decide who their leaders are and blah, blah, blah. That's a given. But certainly the outsiders that are going to pay for the election, that are going to that continue to support with their budget support all the efforts in Kinshasa, that have the relations with the current ruling party. We have a very, very important role to play there, in Kigali, in Kampala, in countries around the world, here in our own country, to demand that processes be free and fair so that the people have a chance to elect the people they want to elect and not the people that are imposed on them. And you do that by intensifying the tools and the mechanisms, the use of the tools and the mechanisms that help do that, by building this capacity of Congolese civil society to hold the process accountable, so that you have that really extensive network of civil society organizations that are linked to international organizations that start working on the observation of the process, 6 or 9 months before it starts, not 3 days before the election starts. Suddenly people get deployed out there. So you can see and watch how these processes unfold, and blow the whistle over and over again wow, this guy's shaking. Oh, he's like, will you hurry up and finish? Look at this. Is it really that bad? So that's my 2 cents, 1.5 cents worth, is that we can play a fairly significant role in ensuring that we have a better election, and we move further and further down the road towards one day when the Congolese people will have the leadership that they need, want, and deserve. Thanks.
And I think one. Okay, you got your applause anyway. I think there's a dimension to elections preparation that we must always be conscious of, and it's what Howard was talking about a little bit earlier in terms of the security sector reform, and that is political preparation for the elections as well. Very little of that is done. A lot of money and time, energy goes in from the international community into the technical preparation of elections, and putting together polling places and making sure the ballot boxes and the ballot papers are there, and et cetera, but not amongst the parties and et cetera. We've done that very successfully in Burundi in the past, and there's another lesson to be learned there, and working with the parties and non-intimidation and working together, of encouraging them to collaborate in the election process. Let's thank John again very heartily. He's always open, always frank, and always fun.